do have this 5th engagement series meeting scheduled for October, where we will do a deeper dive in laying out our contract terms and conditions for the standard small scale power purchase agreement contract. And we'll also talk a little bit more about valuation and how we'll value small scale bids in the RFP process. So please, stay engaged, come back for the October meeting, and in the interim, feel free to submit the questions and comments so that we can take them under consideration. We do have one more slide. Do I see another? Oh, let's move to the next slide. So we have some resources for prospective participants. And if, there are organizations or individuals on the line who think, hey, they might have an idea for a site and a project that they'd like to offer to PacifiCorp. But maybe this isn't their main line of business and they're not sure exactly where to start. We thought we'd provide some resources today. So first of all, we mentioned the 3 megawatt minimum criteria. If there are individuals that have resources that are less than 3 megawatts and they want to offer those to the utility, you always have that opportunity. And we encourage you to go to this website for qualifying facilities. It's all laid out in tariff format, including a standard contract. So you can, make those requests to the utility, follow the steps, and, you can pursue your project less than 3 megawatts. So please encourage you to look there. Then, we mentioned that we were not going to consider BTAs as part of this small scale RFP process. If there are individuals, organizations, developers that would like to offer their smaller scale resources between 3 and 20 megawatts to the utility, as an asset sale akin to a BTA, we encourage you to reach out to the benchmark team. They're really the group within PacifiCorp that's best suited to consider those opportunities. And, they may in turn offer your project up to us as a benchmark as part of the RFP process. So then resources greater than 3 megawatts or any resource at all, if you're looking for development and construction resources, we were thinking about Oregon organizations that may have resources available for you and information on their website that could be helpful. And 2 organizations that came to mind were Energy Trust of Oregon and Solar Oregon. Energy Trust of Oregon has a general renewable energy site with various resources and information. And then they also have their trade ally contractor list that is available up on the web to review. And then Solar Oregon similarly has a number of resources on its website. In terms of notification, you can expect to be notified of this RFP in 3 ways. First and foremost, we do have an RFP distribution list that has over 600 emails on it. If you're not already there and you'd like to participate, please use one of those emails listed and send us an email and we'll add you to that list. Secondly, once we firm up our RFP plans and we have our RFP draft and our pro forma contract, we will be creating an RFP website and posting that to the internet. We already have a supplier, energy supply procurement website, and you would expect any future RFPs to be posted to that website. Thirdly, we will host a bidder workshop after the RFP has been notified via email and posted to the website. We'll choose a date and provide a webinar or a Teams meeting to walk through the RFP and answer any questions. So that is all the prepared information we have today. We look forward to the October meeting, and if there are any remaining questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or request to come off mute now and ask us.
Not seeing any hands coming up now, but as mentioned before, if you drop a question in the chat, we will be sure. Oh, spoke too soon, Micah.
Just to be clear, this is more of a general question section, right?
Sure.
Okay, great. I guess I just had a follow-up on the question that I asked earlier. I apologize about the disjointedness. I'm still learning this whole process. There's a lot to take in. So I guess to Matt McVie and Daniel McNeil, when it comes to the modeling for this allocation as part of stage 3, I guess when you're talking about things like pathways 1 and 2 to compliance with HB 2021, do you have assumptions about how that allocation process will take place when you're modeling pathways 1 and 2, especially when it comes to the cost of changing the allocation with those resources, or is that something that's also left up to be determined in the future?
I mean, as far as the modeling, I'd have to defer. So, I mean, the eventual cost would be based on kind of the actual. So when we get to 2030 to 2035, 2040. So, the modeling of those, the assumption right now is we have the approved allocation methodology, which is essentially a share. It was, historically what we've had is, a resource portfolio, and then the allocation of the costs and benefits associated with that resource portfolio was recalculated on essentially an annual basis. It was with each filing in Oregon. So the idea was to match the benefits with the usage, and the costs would follow the benefits. So, when it comes to the modeling, that part I would have to maybe defer, and I think Randy might be able to answer that. But as far as the actual costs and where we get, those will be impacted by the allocation methodology, but we don't have that one looking forward to 2030 yet. We're in negotiations right now, trying to come up with one, and we're hopeful that we'll get there. It's a long process because we have to look at each state, and we're trying to come up with something that allows each state to follow its own energy policy. And so, with that, it's going to take a while to work through that, to try to figure out all of the impacts, because it does affect all of our operations. It's how we allocate all of our costs. When it was a single portfolio, it was a lot easier because it was a lot like a market. We had a bunch of resources in very advantageous places, least cost dispatch, least cost planning. That's what you see in an organized market. But what we're seeing now is specific resource requirements, and we're trying to figure out how do we make those flow. And I believe the question I missed might have related to how that works, the allocation of costs and resources. The allocation methodology, whatever we have, will respect each state's kind of resource requirements and energy policy. So there will not be a resource that is kind of used to serve Oregon specifically and including rates and then called something else. It's going to be that, those particular resources that are included in the fixed cost of rates that follow the state energy policy. So I might defer to Randy to talk a little bit about modeling.
Sure. Are you able to hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Randy.
Okay, I'm getting an echo on my side, obviously because I've still got the sound on. Hang on a moment. Let me see if I can fix this. I don't know if I can or not, but that's okay. I'm just going to step back from my desk. If you recall, I had some technical problems earlier. I've overcome most of them. So I'm actually able to speak from my headset now. Hopefully I'm clear. But with regard to the modeling, we model the IRP and the CEP optimizations in alignment with how we run our system. And that means that we operate as a system. So the considerations, if you think about where the IRP and the CEP sit in the whole string of processes, and there are many, I like to think of it incrementally, where one step in the process, say the IRP, affects another step in the process, the CEP affects another step in the process, procurement and the small scale renewables procurement process, which affects another step in the process. And then in the context of, for example, the 2-year integrated resource planning cycle, the effects of all those steps in chain then affect the next round, so that when the IRP next sees the portfolio, it's able to see what has happened and resources that have been realized and brought onto the system. So it's very cyclical. It's very recursive, meaning that what you do now affects what you will be doing later, self-affecting. And so that's the chief comment that I would like to make on that, is that at this stage in the modeling, for its purposes, the allocation is not a part of that. The purpose of the IRP is to find that ideally optimized portfolio for system operations, which gives the lowest risk and lowest cost to all customers. And that it's not until the stage 3 of the CEP where we take a look to see if there's any gaps for meeting Oregon's targets. And we say, oh yeah, we've got a few small holes here. How are we going to fix them? And the allocations pathways at this time appear to be the best kinds of options that we have available.
Morgan, I've had a chance to read through the Q&A a little bit more. And I guess there are 2 items we could address briefly if there's no more questions. I saw the comment about the EIM being a prerequisite for small scale renewables. And I think the comment was more around the fact that we have a minimum size of 3 megawatts that we're accepting, because if it's less than 3 megawatts, and I'm not the subject matter expert to go into detail, but if it's less than 3 megawatts, then there's additional reserves and procurement that we have to do to cover for it. And it's related to EIM. And Paul, if you are more, if you want to answer that, otherwise we'll prepare a response prior to the October meeting to, if more response is needed.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'd add that you're right. Our intent there is EIM eligibility and also to this VERS variable energy resource capabilities, and through that mechanism, that would be the way you could possibly deck in a dispatch. So our understanding is that's the threshold that would get you to be eligible to participate in those mechanisms. So that's really what we're after.
And then I saw one other question that we might have missed, or I missed it. Could we expound on how smaller, essentially small scale renewables and CBREs may be considered separately, any differentiation in power purchase rates? I would encourage you to come to the October engagement series meeting. We have discussed and we will have plans for certain consideration for different types of resource bids, whether they're Oregon located or CBREs, and we'll be able to talk more specifically about those plans at the next meeting.
And Mike, we do see your comment. we are happy to talk with you offline if you want specifics. I think the question was largely around the IRP and the CEP, which was first on the agenda. So we might also just direct you to that presentation unless you have more specific or a very specific question on it at this time that wasn't covered.
Appreciate it. I don't know if you can hear me all right, but yeah, thanks for the response. I was just responding to a comment from Randy, might have just been off the cuff. So yeah, nothing really I need to expand on here, but we'll probably be writing about this in our comments, but thanks for thinking about it.
Of course. Thanks for chatting in. Any other questions before we move on and thank Heather and Paul for their presentation? Perfect. Well, without further ado, we will hand it off to the DSP update. Ian.
All right. Yeah, so hey everyone, I am Ian Hugendam and I am the manager of the distribution system planning team. The distribution system planning team focuses on advancing distribution system planning processes in Oregon to increase transparency into our planning and also consider non-traditional solutions that leverage energy programs and emerging technologies on the modern distribution grid. So today I'm going to provide a recap of the distribution system planning community workshops that we just had in the Upper Rogue, which is communities that are north of Medford and also in Prineville. And then I'll cover some of the solution approaches that we're considering and some of the feedback that we received from stakeholders at the workshops. And then finally, I'll cover our plans for next steps in the study cycle and community engagement. Next slide, please. So we had our second round of distribution system planning workshops the week of August 7th for the Upper Rogue and Prineville communities. And so for the workshop in Upper Rogue, the stakeholders that joined us included the Energy Trust representatives from the Energy Trust of Oregon, RHT Energy, Shady Cove city managers, Jackson County Long-Term Recovery Group, and also some members of the Shady Cove community that were not associated with any organization. And then in Prineville, the stakeholders that joined us included, again, representatives from the Energy Trust of Oregon. We had Neighbor Impact there, Prineville City, and Economic Development of Central Oregon, and the Crook County Chamber of Commerce. So on the right, you can see there are two maps. And so in those maps, the colored lines represent the different circuits in the study areas. And then on the left side, you'll see some orange shaded areas, and those represent fire high consequence areas. And that requires additional considerations when we're looking for solutions. So at the workshops, we provided an overview of what grid needs are within the scope of distribution system planning and how we are developing solutions to address those needs. And then we got into some specifics of grid needs that we identified in both study areas and how we can potentially focus energy programs to reduce or offset demand enough to resolve the grid needs. So we found one grid need in the Upper Rogue area and two in the Prineville area that we saw potential to be addressed by focusing energy programs in specific areas of the distribution systems. So for the Upper Rogue area, we also provided an update on wildfire mitigation activities that have recently been completed and are planned in the area. And we also discussed where we see overlap with distribution system planning. And we talked about that at the second round because we heard in the first round of workshops in Upper Rogue that wildfire was a primary concern in that area. Next slide, please. So during the workshops, we talked about how we have traditionally addressed grid needs, and that involves upgrades, expansion, or reconfigurations of the distribution system. And an objective of these workshops was to seek feedback from the communities regarding the non-traditional solutions that we are now evaluating. So some of the non-traditional solutions involve leveraging existing energy programs like focused solar adoption and energy efficiency improvements, expanding our demand response programs for distribution grid need purposes, and collaborating with smaller groups on other unique energy solutions. And so we wanted to hear the experience, concerns, and interest on these various energy program approaches. So when we discussed solar, some of the things that we heard in both Prineville and Upper Rogue was that there were concerns around energy equity, and the stakeholders also talked about resource barriers for both financial and time, and that the current incentives aren't enough, and that there's confusion around understanding financials on how to get started in the process. And there were also concerns with fraud, specifically around door-to-door sales. So when we discussed energy efficiency, we heard about some of the energy efficiency improvements that stakeholders had made in that area. We also heard of some weatherization efforts that the Neighbor Impact Organization has been pursuing in Prineville for populations below the 200% poverty level. And then we also heard about programs that the Energy Trust of Oregon offers for commercial and industrial customers. And we're going to be working with them and trying to make a plan to talk to some of the larger loads on one of the circuits regarding those programs. So, and also when we discussed our demand response programs, we talked about a new optimal times reward program that the company is planning to roll out in the fall. And what that offers incentives to participants to allow the company to control smart thermostats and retrofit water heaters to be able to control those as well during peak hours when the grid is strained. So PacifiCorp has traditionally used our demand response programs as a transmission resource to address larger system needs. But we believe that there is an opportunity and some potential to develop some new use cases for localized dispatch to address distribution grid needs. So our takeaways from all the feedback as we were discussing these various energy programs is that we need to collaborate with our partnerships to find the opportunities to leverage existing programs through their full potential, increase education, and find new ways to break down resource barriers to adopting solar and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So here I just wanted to briefly review where we are at in our current study cycle and community engagement series, and what our next steps are. So we began the year by selecting study areas that we believed have potential for non-traditional solutions to be identified. So after selecting our study areas, we began to enhance some of our processes around forecasting, developing some weather normalization processes, and using advanced metering infrastructure in areas that do not have SCADA measurements as a substitute. And so we use these enhanced processes to conduct our load forecast for both the Upper Rogue and Prineville study areas. And then we had our first round of community workshops where we introduced distribution system planning. We presented our initial forecast results. We listened to feedback, and we learned about the values and needs of both of the communities. After the first round of workshops, we began to run simulations of our forecasts on models of our distribution systems to identify forecasted grid needs for the next 10 years. And then we identified traditional wire solutions and alternative non-traditional solutions where applicable. We then had our second round of workshops to educate, present our findings, and listen to feedback regarding the solutions that we are considering. And now we are developing our final project proposals, and we are continuing to collaborate with the Energy Trust of Oregon to evaluate and plan for solutions in both of the study areas. And towards the end of the year, we plan to have a final round of workshops to present our conclusions and discuss next steps with the communities. So if you're interested in hearing more, we do have links to the slides and recordings of both of our workshops on the distribution system planning website. I'll post the link here in the chat in a moment. And if you have questions, feedback, or want to be added to our mailing list to hear about future workshops, you can contact the distribution system planning team by emailing dsp@pacificor.com, and I'll also post that in the chat as well. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments on what I've just covered.
I spoke too soon last time, so I'm going to give it an extra second here. But not seeing any come in. Ian did just share the website in the chat for those interested. Oh, spoke too soon again. Kyle. Would love to hear what you have for us.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for the opportunity for the question. Just curious, Ian, if you can talk a little bit more about that, the layer incremental EV and DER adoption forecast. Is that a generic EV and DER adoption data set that you're incorporating in there, or is it specific to the community at hand, i.e. projects identified, through an energy sustainability plan or energy plan that the community wants to pursue that could be potentially worked into the forecast?
So part of the requirements of our distribution system planning filings was that we work with or develop a forecast for electric vehicles and solar adoption rates for, I think we got it for the next, it's over 20 years, I think. But they were studies that were done by a group called AEG and DNV, and they were done at we got them down to the circuit level. And I believe it was a top-down forecast methodology where they looked at solar growth for the state, and then we looked at the characteristics of the circuits and tried to get those forecasts down to the circuit level. And then so we have been layering those into our load forecasts to see the impacts there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I believe it does. Thanks for fielding that.
Thank you for the questions. Anything else before we hand it off to our community engagement SMEs? Hearing none, then I will pass it over to Christina Medina.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think my slide content will be a little bit softer than a lot of the information that you just received. I want to take a moment to just acknowledge that we have received pretty consistently in the engagement space feedback to try to deliver our content in advance to our sessions. We have heard you. You're not trying to intentionally not be more nimble, but really what our challenge is that some of these decisions are being made and developed and discussed up until maybe even minutes before we present. So the content isn't always ready, but we're getting faster and we're learning more. So thank you for being so generous with your feedback. So with that, I'd like to proceed into the content here today. So I wanted to just kind of remind folks on the line that we're continuing down our engagement roadmap. And what that really looks like is continuing to hold meetings with various stakeholders as well as with tribal nations. We're continuing to try to find ways to solidify how we integrate the information that kind of surfaces in these engagement spaces, as well as kind of adapt our approaches in those spaces. As you might have noticed, we continue to try to do so. And then we want to continue to work to develop an equity lens across our service areas. And what that means is that not only are we trying to find ways to measure impacts, we're also trying to understand what needs to be measured, as well as receive feedback, integrate that into the lens, and then distribute that information, not only inside our company, but also outside of our company. So it's quite an interesting cyclical process, but we're here for it. Next slide, please. I thought it might be helpful for the group just to get maybe a little bit of insight as to some early, what we feel are engagement impacts kind of resulting from all of the interface that we're having with various community groups and others. So I thought I might take a moment to highlight that for the group today. A few areas that we're seeing some real changes are that the number of engagement spaces continue to grow. In fact, this is my second presentation today. I had the honor of presenting to a cluster group for the 9 tribes of Oregon earlier today. And again, that's new for us. And so we're continuing to adapt and see how we can offer information that is hopefully well received and understood and fosters thought and dialogue in a way that can help to impact our decisions moving forward. We also are looking at developing new tools and approaches on how we communicate and expand our outreach. We've noticed that we've continued to adapt those approaches, but also, you know, when we talk about communication, do we need to record more meetings? Are there more translation opportunities available? Should we be using other modalities to provide information? And when we provide that information, what is the language that we're using? Even the lexicon, I guess, that we're using to provide those updates or content. We're also finding that we're continuing to build new relationships. And we're finding that we're able to kind of help amplify opportunities for collaborations, which has been really neat for us. We've been inviting other members to participate and actually present in some of our stakeholder engagement spaces. Some examples of that would be the Energy Trust of Oregon and the Department of Energy. We realize that a lot of the impacts that we want to see happen or that we want to foster and support really can't happen in a silo, that partnerships are really the best use of people's time, energy, and dollars, and that we owe it to our communities to help foster collaborations when at all possible and hopefully help build partnerships. We're also finding that the impact and the input that we receive really starts to shape how we deliver programs and what information we offer and start to kind of surface out of those programs. So we're seeing some real shifts in many areas around, you know, what is the modality that we use to build out a program? Should we carve out dollars in a program to be more specific? For example, one of those examples would be actually technical assistance. We're finding that, you know, for many groups, when we wear our equity lens, just the technical aspect alone can be a significant barrier to understanding whether or not a group can even participate in some of these programs. So how do we start to kind of offer more technical opportunities and support in those spaces? Community voices continue to influence how we think about planning. It's pretty much my life here. So we spend a lot of time just kind of reviewing feedback, trying to understand, you know, what it means. It provokes thought, it provokes dialogue, and it helps us to really consider what the end user experience is going to be, and, you know, as a result of a lot of the decisions that we make, which I think is quite powerful. And then finally, we tend to call our experts, like the ones that presented today, our subject matter experts. And I am not at a loss of having members or experts wanting to present to our CBIEG or in our tribal nations engagement spaces, or even in this space, the clean energy planning space. We have many people that want to get in front of the audiences to really start to test their concepts and see if the approach is landing, or if maybe there's an opportunity that maybe might surface that they might not have seen, you know, within just operating within the organization itself, which could sometimes be a limited lens, right? Next slide, please. So I'll wrap because I'm keeping this really light today. With this slide, just to remind everybody that we do have several engagement venues. We continue to kind of nurture those along. We have our Clean Energy Plan engagement series, which we're participating on today. We have our Tribal Nations engagement series, which happens every other month as well. So in the months we don't have the CEP, we have the Tribal Nations engagement section going. And then we have our Oregon Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group, which meets every month. In addition to that, as mentioned by some of the other SMEs, they've shared their dates for their engagement venues. And I would expect to continue to see some growth and adaptation in all of these spaces as we start to, I think, move forward on how we kind of consider work groups to have greater, more in-depth conversation and dialogue around some of these key concepts moving forward. And with that, unless there are any questions, I would love to pass it off to Stephanie. And I hope you all heard me. I have my headphones on and it's kind of muffly.
It was clear on our end.
Okay, good. Never know. All right, thanks.
Yep, and full circle, back to you, Stephanie. Kicked us off and closing out our last section.
Yeah. So thank you, Christina and Morgan. Going on the topic that Christina, was talking about with our community engagement, hand in hand with that comes the feedback that we are hearing. So we want to talk about the evolving approach on tracking this feedback. So I will say, in the hosting events that we've had, these engagements and other engagements that we may not have been hosting, we've listened to the feedback in them. And that's what's helped us, really look at how we're creating this feedback repository or tracker. We heard that you want to have your input incorporated in the company's plans. You want to understand, what's being used with what's being provided to the company in these spaces that you're providing your feedback to us on. You want to see transparency and accountability. So we heard what you said and emphasized the importance that this does mean to us. And we want to make sure that we hold ourselves to that, transparency and accountability, making sure we're capturing all of the input, questions, or feedback that we receive. So as we take this information, we've, not only collectively got the information together, we're wanting to make sure that it stays consistent. We have information provided back out to everyone, and it is in a usable filtering approach method that you can have. So we work to develop the process in making this be a sustainable, routine process once we've done our review audit of the information we've received so far. We're wanting to do this in a staging of, posting that information available for people. And then after that point, we'll be providing routine updates after engagements are taking place. We're receiving that feedback. What we're doing is we capture the feedback. We internally share that feedback for insights from the subject matter experts, as Christina was talking about, to provide, what is the correct responses if we still need to provide them. And then can we also add in a layer of what are the impacts that we could capture, and we could share that back with everyone, and having that transparency when we're posting it out on our website to show people that we are hearing the feedback, we are talking about it, we're sharing this information across teams, and we're seeing how we can incorporate this into our processes or in our plans of what we're doing. On these bullet points down here, is what we're trying to say is, we're wanting to make sure that it's easy to navigate. So you'll be able to filter this feedback information that we'll have out there, where you can look at it by the work groups or these engagement spaces. You could filter it by dates or topic categories. Again, we want to have it be public facing. So specifically being available on our Clean Energy Plan website. So you can access the information and view it and filter it as best you want to see, and you know, look and see if there's something additionally you would like to respond to and provide feedback at our email that we have for OregonCEP@pacificorp.com. But then, you know, eventually what we also want to do is, you know, looking to having a point where that feedback tracker is available there to not only have where you can provide your insight and information, but then also even not just having the email option, but putting an interface availability where you could submit released with your questions. And again, that would get incorporated into the feedback tracker, and also having the information captured. And again, we can share that information back out. So now let's switch to the next slide, and we'll take a look at what the feedback tracker is starting to come out to look into. So first, let's cover what we've got on the feedback tracker. So what we're doing is we're capturing the engagement spaces again. We're showing what engagement space this feedback was provided to us. We have the date where we're providing the date of information this was provided in, and the category would be the next one that we were also having the information available. So again, you can sort by category, the feedback that was provided, our response that was provided, and then again, looking at how we can provide impacts on what we saw for that information that we could actually incorporate into and have impacts be achieved from the information we've received from you all. So to take a step back too, I want to point out again, back on the previous slide, if you see these blue boxes to the left here, you know, each of these, well, the three first slides, the columns here, I should say, for engagement, date, and category, those would be your, you know, sections you could filter the information by. So as you're looking at specific engagement spaces or date frames that you want to look at, or a category, those would be what you're wanting to utilize. And then on now the boxes for the engagement and category, what we've done is you know, really has worked on our due diligence and working across with the subject matter experts of, you know, limiting and having consistent naming conventions put in place for these fields. So, and keeping it as a more of a drop-down option when the information is being incorporated in here. So when you're going to filter on these, the naming conventions stay the same. So it helps provide easier points where you can filter down to the specific topics or engagements that you're wanting to focus on. So also, while we have this up, I think it would be probably good. I was specific on the couple of choices that I brought to show today, because I thought they were really great, because they circle back right into our conversation earlier from Ryan's. So, you know, you can see on the screen here, you know, in one of our CBIAG engagements in December, we had the feedback provided as, you know, are the resilience hubs or community hubs within scope of, you know, of the CBREs, and is this something we could go into? You know, and it was something that we said, yep, you know, that we'll look into it and we'll investigate it. And then now you can see over the impacts, you know, that is something that's now being in consideration. And so, and then the other feedback we have on the next one is on one of our CEP engagements, also on a CBRE, how is Pacific Corp thinking of the CBRE benefits compared to the larger system. We've got our response here for how the modeling was done. And then again, trying to show the, replying back with the impacts of, how we're viewing the CBREs and how, this incorporates in with that. So what I wanted to add, then continue from here, was, again, we're looking at putting this information live. But before we do, as we're working through putting our, following up on our responses and having this impacts in, we're asking the subject matter experts to think about how they can respond to this. And the questions, we pose to them to think of are, how do we use this information? What does this influence of your work or make change happen? We're looking at things, to just, what can we do of how we can think of this further? Definitely, open to ideas and suggestions from anyone, on, additional questions or things or ways to think of that. Definitely open to also, any suggestions for consideration of another column here of something else that we might not have provided as we're looking at this feedback tracker information that we'll be providing shortly. So with that, anybody have any things of consideration to maybe add? And if not in this meeting here, definitely, again, you can utilize our email of Oregon CEP at pacificcorp.com. Well, I see we have, somebody has a hand up.
Hey, thanks so much. I guess just, I think I might have missed this. Did you have a date, I guess, a publication or a timeline for the feedback tracker?
So what we're targeting for, sorry, you're right, I had that in my spiel and I missed over it. Targeting to have this getting posted within 2 weeks. It will be capturing, the data that the feedback we've received up until, I think we have June 2023 captured. And then what we're doing from there is layering in the following months following that to getting it more into a routine process of getting updated regularly and putting up onto the website after that.
Thank you. And then just a follow up too on that. So it looks like in the feedback, these are questions. And I'm just curious, will the feedback column also be capturing comments or criticisms or even like proposals?
We're capturing any of the feedback if it's questions, input, or comments. We're not leaving it specifically limited to questions.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. Appreciate it. Okay. And if there's nothing else, then, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christina. You can add on.
Probably a little odd. I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that we post the notes from all of our engagement sessions. So recommendations, comments, all of those things are always noted anyway. But we're hoping that this tool will just make it easier for folks to navigate and really kind of not have to sort through every bit of note if it's not helpful.
Yeah, we're hoping that this will help with the filtering. You could really narrow it down instead of trying to look through notes of meetings. Having one place to sorting down on a category if you wanted to look at specific information, or if you wanted to see a specific engagement space and see what was said, that, you know, trying to capture, again, that input and feedback provided to us. Thank you, Christina. And Claire.
Thank you, Stephanie. And excited to see this continue to roll out and further the goals of accessibility, transparency, and accountability. But with that, as mentioned, this is a public meeting and is very much gauged at increasing input. So would love to open it up for public comment if there is any from the participants today. Not hearing any right off the bat. If you do have something to add, always feel free to drop it in the chat or follow up via the email provided. Stephanie, you want to close us out and cover next steps?
Sure. So we appreciate the discussion today and definitely the feedback we've received. If it was something that you didn't have time today in the meeting specifically to provide or availability, please utilize again the email. We have it on the screen on this slide too as well for the Oregon CEP at pacificorp.com. We definitely appreciate hearing from you. This will also, as a reminder, we are recording this, so it will be posted. It takes a little while for getting ready for production to going online. So it will be, a few days before we get it posted out there. We do also offer the presentation itself and notes, and we'll also add that there is availability of them on the website for Spanish translation too as well. So this slide here, we've been just tracking along on our journey here with our engagement series. And so, we've met in February, April, and June, and here we are in August. We wanted to talk about the plan evolution, and that's, kind of where we're at. Next steps. So it's in October, we're going to come back and we're going to keep the conversations going on how things are continuing, provide some review on some of this feedback on how other things are developing, and reflect again on how things have changed from where we started to now and where we'll be in October. So looking forward to that. Hope everybody had learned something new from the presentation today. We enjoy, again, your feedback and your discussions with us. And we thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.